Tonight.
Like a mafia regime, they want to massacre any of their critics or opponents.
After a weekend of violence, will the fragile one-week-old ceasefire between Israel and Hamas hold? And
this is now the third longest shutdown in history.
We need to reopen the government, stand by a hard-working federal civil servant.
20 days and counting. The stalemate over the government shutdown causing travel delays and national park closures while federal employees work without a paycheck. Plus,
there's one thing worse than Alzheimer's, it's ignorance of the disease.
The effort to help caregivers navigate the complexities of Alzheimer's. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A ceasefire remains in Gaza tonight, but growing questions over whether it will last. Good evening from our Washington News Bureau. I'm John Jessup. Well, top White House officials are in Israel tonight working to keep President Trump's peace plan on track. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and senior White House advisor Jared Kushner met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier today. The talks come after a violent weekend that threatened the fragile ceasefire in the region. On Sunday, Israel accused Hamas of killing 2 soldiers. In response, Israel launched airstrikes in Rafah. Despite the flare-up, Israel says the ceasefire is still holding. They've also pledged to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. The next phase of the peace deal is expected to include Israel pulling back from parts of Gaza and efforts to disarm Hamas. President Trump told Fox News, though, there's no timeline to disarm the terror group.
Not a timeline, not a hard line, but we're going to see how it all works out. They've lived there for a long time. They're very violent, as you understand. You've been covering it for a long time. But we're going to find out. So it's not a hard timeline, but it's a line in my own mind. And at a certain point, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, then we'll have to do it for them.
Hamas says it has no plans to disarm despite mounting international pressure. At the same time, reports are growing that Hamas is clashing with rival groups inside Gaza, even executing civilians accused of cooperating with Israel. And now another major test for the ceasefire. Israel is still waiting for Hamas to return the bodies of the remaining deceased hostages. More are expected to be returned later this week. Well, for more, let's bring in our panel. Natalie Econo, Senior Research Analyst at Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and CBN Senior White House Correspondent Kelly Wright. Kelly, I'd like to start with you. What is the White House's goal? What are they hoping to achieve by sending Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff back to Israel? And is this potentially a sign of growing concern that the ceasefire and the broader peace plan may be unraveling?
So look, there are concerns, John, good evening to you, by the way, but there are concerns within the Trump administration to make sure that they can hold the line on this very fragile ceasefire in the Middle East. Hamas, it continues to show its true colors in helping and being hell-bent on disrupting the deal by conducting violent attacks, as you talked about, on Israeli defense forces. Over the weekend, Trump said that hopefully there will be a little less violence going forward. But even today, John, he mentioned that the Vice President of the United States will be going there tomorrow. The Vice President is expected to meet with various leaders in Israel, as well as visit the command center that's in charge of overseeing this fragile ceasefire. And then there are reports that he may even go to Gaza. But here's the bottom line. If Hamas is not good on following with their plans, for example, in actually turning over all of the hostages. There are 16 dead hostages that still remain to be sent back to their homeland in Israel. That is part of phase 1. Phase 2 is for Hamas to totally disarm, and that is something they haven't done, and Israel will retaliate. And the president says, he said that today in the cabinet meeting today, that if they do not respond, then he will see to it that they are eradicated. That will not be U.S. troops, but troops on the ground, either Arab forces or even Israel Defense Forces.
Speaking of Hamas, Natalie, President Trump has suggested that Hamas leadership may not have been directly involved in the weekend violence. If that's true, what does that say about Hamas's internal control at this stage of the conflict? And could that point to a breakdown in command or rogue elements acting independently?
You know, if what the president said is true, that sort of suggests that Hamas is losing control of the Gaza Strip. Now, that being said, I doubt that Hamas didn't at least know what was going on if it wasn't directly involved in the breakdown of the ceasefire and weekend violence. Hamas, before the war and during the war, maintains a tight grip on everything that goes on in Gaza. That's militarily, politically, socially. So it's hard to believe that they also didn't have a hand in, the latest developments. At the same time, the Israelis have done an incredibly successful job over the last 2 years degrading Hamas to the point where it's basically a shell of what it was on October 6th, 2023. But I still think that what we've seen in the last couple of days at least was on Hamas's radar if Hamas wasn't involved in it directly.
And Natalie, while I have you, to something that Kelly just mentioned, Trump had threatened to eradicate Hamas if it breaks the ceasefire deal. We know that he's said that troops won't be in the ground or on the ground in Gaza, but could you envision any type of scenario where U.S. troops do get involved in Gaza?
So I don't think at this point U.S. troops will or should get involved on the ground in Gaza. At the end of the day, this is Israel's war. Now, Israel is fighting that war on behalf of not only itself, but on behalf of America, the broader Western world, the other countries whose citizens were killed or taken hostage on October 7th. But even if American boots aren't going on the ground, I do think that what we need right now from the Trump administration is unwavering support for Israel to continue its battle against Hamas should Hamas break this current ceasefire.
Kelly, I want to move to another conflict zone. President Trump is signaling a shift in support for Ukraine following what's reported to have been a tense meeting with Zelensky last Friday. What more can you tell us about this?
It's very difficult to explain exactly what's going on in the mind of President Donald Trump as it relates to Ukraine. We do know that his wife, the First Lady, has been dealing directly with Putin and getting some of those children, Ukrainian children in Russian custody, released. 8 of 50,000 have been returned so far. But here's the deal right now. That meeting that he had with Zelensky on Friday, apparently once the cameras left the room and the press left the room, it turned sideways, and Zelensky left very disappointed. We also understand that, again, in that cabinet meeting room today, when the president was meeting with the Australian president, the president was asked, what did he say to Vladimir Putin of Russia last Thursday on that phone call ahead of Zelensky's visit? And the president actually told Putin to stop attacking civilians on the ground in Ukraine. Also, there are reports that Zelensky and Trump are actually trying to figure out a deal on those Tomahawk missiles. The president, again, not committing to that. Zelensky believes that would be very important to have the use of those Tomahawk missiles to bring Putin to the table. We do know that based on the conversation that the president had with Zelensky, we do not know if Zelensky will be meeting in Budapest, Hungary next week or the week after that, when the president sits down with Vladimir Putin for a second time and trying to broker a deal. But things remain very up in the air and very unclear and murky in trying to broker peace between Ukraine and Russia at this time.
Accomplishing peace is no easy task. Kelly Wright for CBN and Natalie Cano with Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Sure.
Well, closer to home, tensions are rising as the U.S. military continues targeted strikes against alleged drug traffickers in the Caribbean. President Trump now vowing to cut off aid to Colombia, accusing its president of being an illegal drug leader. CBN National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke joins us now. Caitlin, what's the Colombian government's response to these threats?
John, Colombian President Gustavo Petro rejected Trump's accusations, describing himself as the main enemy of drugs in his country. A statement from the Colombian Foreign Ministry calls the comments, quote, a direct threat to national sovereignty. Still, President Trump isn't backing down.
They make drugs. They refine drugs. They make cocaine. They have cocaine factories. They have no fight against drugs.
This latest escalation follows a series of U.S. strikes on alleged drug boats in the region, the most recent this past Friday. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth posting on X that the vessel had connections to a Colombian terrorist organization and carried a substantial amount of narcotics. This is the 7th confirmed U.S. strike, leaving a total death toll of 32, while also raising questions about the administration's use of deadly force.
All of these people have been blown up without us knowing their name, without any evidence of a crime.
The U.S. routinely conducts military strikes to kill terrorists in foreign countries, Not even talking about international waters, which is what we're talking here. When somebody's committing an active crime that kills individuals, it is allowed and fair and routine for the U.S. military to use force against them.
The U.S. military has amassed a large buildup in the Caribbean, including ships, fighter jets, and more than 4,500 Marines and sailors. Naval Station Roosevelt Roads in Puerto Rico also recently reopened. Friday, the administration released new images of military demonstrations off the coast of Venezuela, where it's now conducting, quote, training missions.
If you are a drug dealer, you're going to think twice, 3 times, 4 times before you go on a boat to traffic drugs to the Caribbean. So what we're going to see is a reduction in the inflow of drugs to the U.S. temporarily. Maybe they will try to redirect it through the Panamanian Isthmus, through land, through Mexico, and into the U.S. But the thing is, the U.S., now with the cooperation of the Panamanian government, which is an ally, has a very good chance of catching the drugs in Panama because it's a very narrow strip of land that you can easily control and patrol.
The pressure campaign has some questioning whether it's part of a broader strategy to oust Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Manhattan Institute fellow Daniel DiMartino, the founder of the Dissident Project, tells CBN News the Maduro regime and the Venezuelan drug trafficking organization are one and the same.
We either keep boats and military strikes on the Caribbean perpetually, or we stop the Maduro cartel once and for all, which is not only about drugs, it's also about illegal immigration, it's about crime, it's about Russia and China.
The Trump administration has repeatedly said it does not recognize Maduro as a legitimate head of state, but rather the leader of a drug cartel. In August, the administration offered a $50 million reward for information leading to his arrest. John?
All right, CBN National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke. Thank you, Caitlin. Well, up next, the government shut down with no end in sight. Meanwhile, the FBI investigates a potential security threat to President Trump. All this and more when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. We're just a few hours away from the government shutdown going into 21 days, and neither Republicans nor Democrats appear willing to budge and reach an agreement. For more on that and some of the day's other major headlines, CBN News chief political analyst, if I can get it out, David Brody joins us now. David, it's always great to see you. Thanks for making time for us. So, as I just said, we're on the eve of 3 full weeks into the shutdown. It is the 3rd longest shutdown in history. White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett suggested that it could end by this week once the No Kings protests were done and over with. But Republicans and Democrats seem to be pretty entrenched in their positions. So, David, what do you think it will take for either side to blink and come back to the negotiating table?
Well, it's going to be moderate Democrats, or at least not the far left of the party, Senate Democrats specifically, where they'll vote with Republicans ultimately to end this standoff. That's it. I mean, that's the only way out of this at this point. Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democrats, is fully entrenched. That was the word you used, and it's a great word. He's totally entrenched. And it's interesting, and don't get me wrong, Kevin Hassett, great, knock yourself out with the No Kings rally, but can I compliment myself for a second? I mean, if you don't mind, I said that last week. I said after the No Kings rally, there could be movement. And in essence, that's what Kevin Hassett is saying. And why the No Kings rally? Because specifically the far left is angry and they want to see Democrats fight, fight, fight in their sort of way, not Trump's way. And so therefore, I think that now that the No Kings rally is over, Democrats have a little bit more maneuverability, if you will. Not Schumer, but those moderate Senate Democrats who might say, okay, now it's time to wrap it up and let's work with Republicans.
I picked up on that fight, fight, fight reference. Very nice slide in there. You know, as you mentioned, maybe Kevin Hassett was listening to you, but I remember you saying this last week that the GOP have been really unified during the shutdown. We are seeing some cracks, including on military pay. Republicans and Democrats both say that military should get paid, but even some Republicans have voiced concerns with the process by which the White House is allocating those funds. They say that this circumvents Congress's role. David, your thoughts?
Well, you know, how much time do we have? 25 minutes? Congress's role here, John, is to pass 12 appropriations bills every year. Let me think for a second. Oh, look, I did a quick Google search. And since in the mid-90s was the last time Congress ever passed 12 appropriations bills. They never do it. So for Congress to all of a sudden, especially some of Republicans, to say, hey, wait a minute, the president shouldn't be doing this. We should be doing our job here. Yeah, as we like to say, you know, when we were 7 years old, no duh. You should be, but you're not. And that's been the big problem. Look, the Republicans that have issues with the whole military pay and the appropriations bill, and that it goes through regular order, are people like Lisa Murkowski and some other moderates. But other than that, you have even Democrats who won't even vote for a defense appropriation bill to pay the military. So I don't think there's going to be any fissure right here with Republicans.
And David, I want to talk about the discovery of the hunting stand that was found in a tree with direct line of sight to where President Trump lands when he flies into Florida and West Palm Beach. The FBI says it is now taking the lead in the investigation and is working with the Secret Service and local authorities. David, given 2 assassination attempts on President Trump's life last year, talk about the meaning and the implications of this.
Well, it should be an above-the-fold headline. I don't think there's any question about it based on the context of all of this. Having said that, remember, it wasn't at the Palm Beach airport. It's not like it's on the runway there. There's a hunting stand on the runway. It's a little bit further from the airport. It's in kind of a wooded area. And so whether or not this is actually a real threat or not, we'll find out. But you know, it doesn't seem at this point like there may be anything here. We don't know for sure, but either way, something like this should always be taken seriously, especially in the context of what we've seen.
David, just a few seconds left, but I want to ask you about the No Kings protest we alluded to earlier. The president put out an AI video that showed him wearing a crown. I got to ask, does that fuel his opponent's argument? On the flip side, does the argument lose steam given the fact that they were able to stage those large-scale protests?
A couple of things, and I'll be quick on this. First of all, as it relates to the protests, glad it was peaceful, and that's democracy in action, and good for them that this is the far left of the country who's really frustrated with Trump. Having said that, let's remember, if President Trump was a king, let me think for a second, there wouldn't even be a rally because he'd be a king and he'd like to stop it, and he would stop it, right? But he's not a king, and so I think it kind of deflates them a little bit.
All right, we'll have to leave it there with the final word. CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody. Thanks, David. Coming up, one man's journey through Alzheimer's caregiving becomes a roadmap for others. See how he turned heartbreak into help for families across the country. Welcome back. More than 6 million Americans live with Alzheimer's disease, and over 11 million people, often spouses and other family, assume the role of caregiver with little to no training. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson introduces us to a man who's offering guidance for caregivers based on his own firsthand experience.
Do you like my singing? Yeah? Let me call you sweetheart. I'm in love with you.
Former Wisconsin Governor Martin Schreiber cared for his wife Elaine for 20 years after she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease.
She would get lost driving to and from places she had been driving for the last 10 years. She was a great cook. Sometimes she would mess up recipes so badly she would cry. She would come up with stories that I knew never happened, and that was the beginning of the Alzheimer's journey.
Elaine died in 2022. Towards the end of her life, the two remained close while she lived in a care facility.
There's one thing worse than Alzheimer's, it's ignorance of the disease.
Schreiber's now passing along what he learned.
A caregiver has a 40% chance of dying before their loved one due to stress-related illness. So understand that, number one. But then also as a caregiver, understand that there are things that you can do to make life better.
In his book, My Two Elaines, Schreiber describes falling in love at age 14 with the woman who had their 4 children and helped his political career. Here, she is dancing with President Jimmy Carter. Then, in 2005, she became the one in need.
We are going to help our loved one live their best life possible. And we do that by joining their world.
Schreiber describes compassion as doing what it takes to make them happy. Often that involves avoiding correction.
Elaine, in actuality, asked me, how are my parents? I said, they're both dead. No, they're not. She said, Elaine, your parents are both dead. Well, the shock on her face when she realized she didn't say goodbye, much less attend the funeral, I promised myself that I would never put her through that again. So then the next time she asked me, how are my parents? Oh, I said, they're doing well. I said, your mom likes her church work, your dad likes his... Oh, she said, that makes me feel so good.
Oh. Schreiber urges caregivers to also pay attention to themselves.
A caregiver is a lifeline for their loved one. And a caregiver, because they don't take care of themselves by not enough sleep, by not eating right, by not enough socialization, by just doing all the basic things, they gnaw at that lifeline and it becomes frayed.
Sometimes friends, neighbors, and relatives don't know what to say to Alzheimer's caregivers, so they avoid them. Governor Schreiber says that only increases a caregiver's sense of isolation and despair, so he offers this advice.
Simply acknowledging the fact to a caregiver, I understand what you're going through, and I know that's a challenge. That in and of itself is just such a comforting experience to know that someone understands what's going on, and that makes a big difference.
Blessing a caregiver can also include offering specific ways to help, such as picking up medication, walking the dog, or sitting with their loved one for a bit. So while taking care of a loved one with Alzheimer's can be difficult, there are ways to make the situation better for both the patient and their caregiver. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Thank you, Lori. Coming up, young kids motivated to have fun and get active with a Disney hero. Next on Faith Nation. Well, finally tonight, you've probably heard of fantasy football. Well, how about a fantasy sports camp with one of the world's most beloved cartoon characters? Disney Junior Let's Play teamed up with ESPN's Take Back Sports and LA County Parks to host a sports camp near downtown LA. A group of 75 kids ages 3 to 7 showed up at Cathedral High School for a day of trying out new sports between baseball, flag football, basketball, and soccer. As you can see, the girls getting the goal in right there and hanging out with Mickey.
This is the coolest day, and these kids have the biggest smiles on their face, and this is exactly why we do it, because play brings joy and hope to kids, and even if that's for a day, that instills in them to go after it again and find a new opportunity throughout their life.
Sponsors hope the event inspires kids, and the day is capped off with pictures with Mickey Mouse, as you can see right there. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's edition of Faith Nation. Thanks for joining us. We hope to see you right back here again tomorrow. Good night.